Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof made a really good father. He birthed someone who is free to have another God than the one that was his. They make a really good musical, one of my all-time favorites, out of the question of religious freedom. What is great about Tevye is the way he doesn't just fold and say, oh, it's okay with me, whatever you decide, whomever you decide to worship, that's just fine. Tevye goes nuts. He goes ape. He loves his God so much, and he loves his child so much, that he's presented with a really first-class problem. And he struggles with it on behalf of his God. And he finally comes around. Somebody's going to marry outside the tribe. And it's not right, but it's okay. And the resolution of the musical, and I'll say more about that in a minute, the resolution of the music is somehow that romantic love is as good as spiritual love. And Tevye gives in to the romance of it all. Do I love her? Did I love her? I loved her? He finally gives in to the possibility that there is such a thing as romantic love. And that maybe he didn't have it, but that doesn't mean that somebody else can't. It's a kind of religious freedom that he exhibits. So last week, maybe 10 days ago now, a proper notice, I got an invitation from the sponsoring committee for the international group of Fulbright scholars on their way to NYU. Would I come and speak about religious freedom? 28 people, all of whom speak English, from 28 different countries, but they've never come to the United States. And my invitors said to me, they really don't know anything about the United States, especially about religious freedom, and you have 10 minutes. And I wrote back and said, well, give me an entry point. What about a way in? Do you want me to talk as a Baptist? You know, we have a great history, and we could summarize a piece of it in 10 minutes. Did you want me to talk about abortion? I think abortion is an issue of great import around religious freedom. Do you want me to talk about measles? That's the current topic. What do you want me to talk about? And so I got this hilarious letter back, and I'm not going to pan the whole thing, but I could keep you going for a while. What I had in mind for your panel is a discussion of some of the following. The role of Protestantism in the emergence of an integrative national American creed that scholars like Robert Bellah later called our civil religion. We might call it the separation of church and state, the advent of a distinctive Protestant hegemony. How could you have an academic panel without that word in it? Protestant hegemony in the 19th century, the relationship between Protestantism and the development of an American commercial culture, and how American Protestantism has influenced the Americanization of Judaism, Catholicism, and Islam. Within this context, you may also want to say a few things about some of the following issues, each of which gets a whole paragraph. But I'm going to just bullet them for you in the interest of time. Prayer in the public schools. Constitution denying traditional resort to the coercive power of the state to every religious sect while protecting the right of each freely to compete openly with all of the others. I couldn't make any sense out of that. I couldn't even bullet it. How and in what ways religious leaders and institutions are able to be political or not. The impact of President Trump's anti-Muslim policies, the implications of the recent Pew Foundation report, He summarizes the whole report. And a recent Pew survey that shows the most significant change in the religious landscape of the United States has been the rapid growth of people who say they are unaffiliated. That is also true, and I apparently can do all of that in 10 minutes. It took me 3 here. And then there's more, the present state of liberal theology. And I offer these only as suggestions and leave the content of your remarks entirely up to you. So I'm going to talk about Tevye and how Tevye was a good father. I asked my partner, Warren Goldstein, who's an American historian, to just give me do something, say something. What about religious liberty in the United States? Get me started. And he said, well, we've never really had it, only on paper. True. That in fact, people came here because they wanted more religious freedom. They were being oppressed religiously over there, and they came here and set up a theocracy, asking everybody to believe the way they did. The one good thing about the United States and the Constitution in religious liberty terms is that we didn't just kill massive groups of people for not believing with us. We allowed that much. So there was the lack of an apparatus to kill people for not thinking the way you did. But where I'm going to go today is to tell you that there is so much pressure, even in the disestablishment of Protestantism today, to think like an evangelical Christian, to behave like an evangelical Christian, and if you're not like that, you are not normal. So I'm just still warming up. In this conversation with Warren, I was reminded ever so much of an experience I had in Morocco in 1995. Part of a Henry Luce-funded trip with 30 US-born Muslims, 30 US-born Jews, 30 US-born Christians, half of whom were evangelical and half of whom were liberal Protestants. The Catholics refused to go. It's a long story. We were to travel together for 2 weeks, be the guests of a lot of hotshot Moroccan leaders, political and religious. The reason for the trip was to enjoy what was then considered the most interfaith, the most beautifully interfaith country in the world, Morocco. And indeed, it is a place of genuine religious freedom. When we got to the Minister of Education and got the usual gorgeous trays of mint tea in beautiful serving cups, one of our group, a Christian woman, decided to ask the Minister of Education a hard question instead of a polite question. And she said, "Tell me how you teach religion in your public schools." And the Minister of Education warmed to the question, thinking he would please us. You could kind of see him puff up, and he said, "We allow everyone to read the Koran." When we talk about religious liberty in the US, even today, we allow everyone to be white, male, evangelical, and Christian in their point of view. We allow everyone to do that. It's the people who don't want to do that who are in big trouble. You're not going to get killed for it, but you're not going to get any help yet. More help than before, than earlier in our tradition, but not enough. We let everybody read the Christian version of the Bible. That Bible is widely understood to have a first testament that is improved by the Second Testament. We don't call them old and new for nothing. Or better put, we imagine that religion is what the evangelicals imagine religion is, which is punishmentalist, stigmatizing, and fundamentally wrong in its interpretation of the Bible. Yes, I said wrong. Yesterday, we drove by a Planned Parenthood building in New Haven, Connecticut. Long story. About 24 pro-choice demonstrators were surrounded by other demonstrators on both sides, and one of the people who was against abortion was holding up a sign with Psalm 139:13 written on it. "You formed me in my inward parts. I am fearfully and wonderfully made," as though that says you shouldn't have an abortion. She thought that meant abortion was a sin. It is not. She thought that God does form us in our inward parts. God does. She thought that we are fearfully and wondrously made. We are. And Christians and Jews can read that passage in completely different ways. You can read it punishmentally, and that is prevailing. The punishers win. We do not have religious liberty from or with them. So let's move off the culture wars for a minute, if you can tear yourself away. I certainly can. And let's go back to Daniel. This text is a very interesting one about 3 young men who refuse to worship the kind of God that the king wants them to worship. They're like any good draft resistor, and they were ready to take their medicine. They were sent into the fiery furnace where a guardian angel appeared and took over the power of fire to burn. Now that's spiritual power. Many see this text as a Zoroastrian fight with early Judaism, the kind of thing that religious libertarians enjoy. There was magic afoot in the movement against the Jewish king who overstepped his boundaries. It's widely considered a folk tale that these 3 brave young men go into the fire to prove the power of the Zoroastrian interpretation of God. How can you tell all that hyperbole that's in it? You know, you didn't have just one zither. You had zithers and harps and everything imaginable. You didn't have just a little bit of gold. You had a lot of gold. You had the appearance of an angel that defies the natural way of things. You know, fire usually has a way of continuing to burn. But the story gets really interesting when you hear what they say to Nebuchadnezzar. The story is not about their exercising their religious freedom. They don't mention religious freedom. They don't say, "Look, king, you could be right and we could be right, leave us alone." That's not their argument. They actually argue that their God is better and more powerful than his God. And that's why they went into the fire. They say, "We're going into the fire to show you that our God is better than your God." A fight that's really hard to have. You see, this is what the good father Tevye also finally thought. He was distraught about his child because he actually loved his God and thought his God was the best God in the competition, which continues to this day, about God. So in this context, religious liberty is very hard to understand, especially when you don't have positive practices. Speaking personally and not for you, I believe in opposing the government if it bans abortion, or engages in an unjust draft or an unjust war, or if my neighbors or fellow clergy even sniff at a gay kid, that he or she may go to hell in the eyes of God. I can jump into a fiery furnace about that kind of thing. And why do I do it? Not for freedom, but because I think I'm right. That's why I used the word wrong before. You see, Hobby Lobby and I may have a lot more in common than we think. Tevye and I may be pals, even if a minor dehumanizing discourtesy against a gay kid said in the name of religion is enough for most of us to go into a kind of religious fervor. I don't believe that my God sends me into fiery furnaces so much as I believe in a God who works through decisions that shows up with angels when we are all fired up. Because we're fearfully and wondrously made, right down to our inward parts. So yes, I have set up a problem I do not know how to resolve. I'm like Tevye, and I fiddle on the roof. Tevye allowed romantic experience to overcome his religious fervor. I'm looking for a way for religious and spiritual fervor to get married to the American Constitution's notion of religious liberty. And I don't quite see it yet. I don't see it. The only one hint I do have is that Tevye gave a hint by finally saying, maybe I'm not all right. Maybe I missed something here. Maybe I didn't get it. That could be the marriage. So I found more than a little inspiration in a single comment that was made, the one Martha read so beautifully about the Paul Taylor Dance Company. In the beginning, Taylor thought that the steps didn't have to match the music. But then he decided he wanted more harmony of experience. And I happened to be reading this line after getting that email from the NYU folk. Steps in music have the right to ignore each other. Steps in music do ignore each other. Whether they have the right to do so is another question. The Constitution may have religious liberty written deeply within it, but American creeds and practices have rarely followed. Even today, in this very neighborhood, women who wear scarves religiously never walk alone. They always walk in groups for their own personal safety. So thank God for the Constitution, for the fathers of our country and the mothers too, and for their hopes for us. And thank God for the willingness to change and to say every now and then, maybe 2 or 3 times a day, I'm not sure I'm right about that. Maybe there's another way. See, Taylor apparently changed his mind as he aged in her later work, which turns out to be called Prometheus Fire, all about fire. He changed his experiment. Taylor wanted to be like those idealistic youths who went into the fire on behalf of their God and some harmony between themselves and their God. He wanted a blend and a harmony of step and sound, music and dance, walk and talk. So do many of us. But we need a guardian angel, or at least the hope for one, to assure us that we won't be burnt up or burnt out or just burnt on our way there. There are powers stronger than ours and even stronger than fire. Amen.